Well, certainly what we're seeing at the moment is the budget next month is casting a long shadow over the economy. And we're seeing that in some of our research, which you mentioned, where if there are more tax rises in next month's budget, we could see recruitment for further investment as well for further, but also prices increase as well. So it has wider impacts for the economy. I think one of the sort of big challenges businesses are facing at the moment is that the wider environment is far too uncertain for them to plan and invest over the long term. It's also too expensive to do business as well. Tax is a huge issue for business, but also other issues like energy costs is also dragging on business sentiment more widely. And it's also more difficult to do business as well. The level of regulation is a big challenge. I started observing Business Conference Monitor suggests that regulation is the second biggest issue for businesses are facing at the moment. So that's clearly three big challenges that we need the government to address in next month's budget.
The chancellor says over and over again that this government is committed to growth, and that's what's driving the labor agenda. What would prove that the chancellor is really committed to growth?
Well, unfortunately, while the government do talk about going for growth, unfortunately, a lot of their policies are against that. We see that in a number of ways. We saw the national insurance increase having huge impacts on businesses. Our own data shows that 80% of businesses were negatively impacted by that. So I think what businesses need is a clear plan to drive growth and productivity as well, because they're going to be two big challenges that come out in the budget, because we expect the EOBR to downgrade their forecast of productivity. That causes huge issues for public finances. So the government needs to have a clear and credible plan on how to deliver growth over the long term. That means nationally, but also locally as well.
Suren and Ritika here, just jumping in. Which sectors, when you speak to businesses, which sectors do you think are going to get hurt the most if the Chancellor does indeed raise taxes on businesses?
Well, our data suggests that there are certain sectors that are really going to be impacted, particularly retail and construction. And we're seeing sentiment in those sectors particularly weak because the nature of their workforce and the businesses they operate is that they're more exposed to some headwinds, particularly domestically, and then they change the taxes and insurance rise is a big example of that. So our data suggests that if, for example, there were more tax rises in next month's budget, the construction sector and retail were more likely to cut jobs, for example, than maybe some other sectors. But clearly, we're seeing that having an impact more widely as well. We're also seeing, when you look at wider business sentiment, is that sectors such as property are also particularly weak at the moment. And that is also linked to both the regulatory environment, but also concerns over more tax rises in next month's budget as well.
Suren, do you think businesses would be able to absorb at least part of the higher costs if they do get further tax rises down the line? Or do you think this is going to lead to higher prices eventually for the consumer?
Well, I think what we're seeing at the moment is that businesses are taking quite a mixed approach. So some businesses are looking to absorb at least some of those costs, high costs in low profit margins, for example. And I think that's why we're seeing, for example, business sentiment falling over the last few quarters. But we're also seeing more and more that businesses are reaching a bit of a tipping point where because they can't absorb, there's only so much they can absorb in their own business operating model. So we're seeing that sort of filter through into higher prices, weaker investment. We're seeing cut investment in staff training falling as well. So I think it's seeing businesses struggling to adapt to these higher costs. And if there are more tax rises in next month's budget, you can see the situation only get worse, particularly around recruitment.
When it comes to recruitment, what is your sense, based on your conversations, your surveying of the business community, around whether there are enough of the right kind of workers in the UK?
It's a fairly mixed approach. I think businesses are still saying that they are trying to get some levels of types of employees, particularly in certain sectors. I think construction is a sector where there's still an uphill struggle to get staff. But the issue is at the moment, and we're seeing this in the official data as well, is that demand for labour is actually falling because of the wider economic issues and obviously cost pressures. The cost of employing a person has obviously shot up over the past year. So what we're seeing, counter to the issues around getting staff and getting the right type of staff, actually that's being sort of superseded by weaker demand because of the high cost pressures and wider weakening economic conditions.
When you listen to the Chancellor's latest commentary, she used a speech at a summit in Birmingham just this week to talk about her blitz on business bureaucracy. To what extent is that the problem, and to what extent is the suggestion around cutting some of this red tape going to unlock some of the growth that she's looking for in the UK economy?
Business already tell us that it is pretty difficult to do business, and that's due to a number of factors. There's obviously wider big picture regulation stuff that's really difficult for businesses. Our own data shows that concerns over regulation is at a 7-year high at the moment. That's clearly a concern. What we're also seeing is issues with, for example, the tax system, where that's overly complex. There's multiple VAT rates, for example. Trying to understand that is a big issue for businesses as well. So any action that we certainly welcome, but I think what businesses are looking for is not so much, is obviously partly is less regulation, but also more flexible regulation and more advice and more sensible regulation. So it's not a barrier to growth, actually it helps facilitate growth.
Suren, when you're talking about growth here, what is one policy that you think Rachel Reeves should deliver in her budget to deliver that growth, and for the long term as well, instead of just a short-term kind of a measure?
Well, but what businesses are looking for is the wider environment to help try and facilitate them to invest, recruit, and innovate in new technology, for example. So I think what businesses are looking for is a more certain picture going forward. So what we would like the government to do is commit to no more new business taxes for the rest of this parliament. Because by doing that, you're giving businesses the certainty to plan for the future, and that will hopefully kickstart things like investment in particular.